Hello and welcome to the News Update. Today's brief three-part news segment will concern the rise of the Chinese economy and its implication on other aspects of the nation. Greater land holdings, dominance over trade routes, Asian allegiances, and a larger military have all become priorities for the Chinese and their newfound assertiveness. This is an unsettling situation for the rest of the industrial nations of the world, especially the United States, who is still fresh from a half-centuries-long arms race struggle with the Soviet Union. The three portions of today's program will address significant aspects of China's rise to economic power and will attempt to establish a clear understanding of the international relations thereof. Part 1 will focus on the naval military increase of the PLA and its dominance over the South China Sea. Part 2 will switch gears over to the people of China. Nationalistic pride and desire to assert itself has altered the state of domestic affairs and national outlook of China. And to conclude today's update, we will look at a competition between the United States and China for the allegiance of the other Asian nations. For all three of today's segments, we will be joined by Plishka, who will help us in our discussions. Now we will take a quick commercial break before we will go into part 1.
Whether spending billions building up its own modern fleet to include the latest attack submarines, or laying claim to disputed islands like in August, when it placed a flag on the floor of the South China Sea. China's assertiveness has alarmed neighbors.
They want to, in the long term, dominate the long sea lanes of commerce between at least the Malacca Straits and this part of the world.
Hello and welcome back. Now is our first part of the segment entitled China and the Pacific. Now, over the past 60 years, America has been a leading military force in the Pacific. With its rising power, China has been modernizing its army and has increased its ballistic missile range and payload. The question has to be asked, is this going to be an arms race in the Pacific? Matt?
The short answer to this is not right now. China has been upgrading gradually and in a largely lateral manner. It is true that they are improving in missile capability, but it is not a great threat in range as of right now. Some analysts have taken a weary note that the Chinese have greatly increased their submarine production. They are now up to 66 submarines as opposed to America's 71, and plan on having 85 to 100 by as early as 2030. This is a red flag, but you have to look at the value of these subs that they are producing. By and large, American subs are far more superior to those.
Now this is just the tip of the iceberg for Chinese development in the Pacific though, isn't it?
This is true. The Chinese have also improved upon gathering information more efficiently from many other different outlets, such as sensors, communications, and electronic and cyber warfare. China now has the ability to know what is going on far into the Pacific Ocean. This is all thanks to developments in satellites over the horizon radar, medium-range surface wave radar, reconnaissance drones, and underwater sensor arrays. All of these things are helping China's capability of gaining a complete control of the Pacific without running the risk of having an arms race with the U.S.
Okay. So doesn't this mean an arms race for the United States and China, but what does this mean for the United States in general?
What this means is a more weary America and less complacent Asian allies. It means that American possessions in the Pacific now stand as a potential threat by a more assertive China. With their increased power in space and cyber weapons, China is able to at any time compromise electronic networks in America in a surprise attack. Chinese subs, missiles, and anti-carrier strike groups can target American ships and aircraft carriers within 1,000 to 1,600 miles of the Chinese coast, a coast that has been in the past a place that Americans have not been afraid to cross.
I mean, this appears as if China is being very aggressive, but how aggressive is China in their improvements? I mean, it sounds as if military is a top priority for them.
Not exactly. The Chinese defense budget, which is only partially disclosed to the public, is valued at $70 billion. However, estimates from experts conclude that the total defense budget could be around $99 billion.
Well, this pales in comparison to the United States defense budget, which is around $663 billion. Now, what does this future hold for change in the Pacific?
China is improving and will definitely continue to improve. There is no biding and stagnating for this nation in the future. The People's Liberation Army will modernize quite efficiently and will become more aggressive in control over the South Chinese Sea trade route. Even if America decides to aid its Asian allies in securing control over the Pacific, they will be limited by a decreasing defense budget and the preoccupation in Afghanistan.
All right, with that, we will go to a quick break.
China is going to become more and more of a maritime power because it will depend on the seas for its prosperity, but also its security. And second of all, China is becoming ever more assertive in establishing or in claiming its interests.
Analysts say China's rise is a natural outcome of its economic development. What is harder to understand, they say, are China's military ambitions.
Hello and welcome back. Now we will move on to our second part of our program entitled Less Biting and Hiding. Now Matt, what would you say is a consensus among Chinese citizens about their view of America?
Alarmingly for the United States, Bill, the majority of Chinese citizens believe the U.S. to be their enemy. However, the Chinese government views the U.S. as a valuable business partner ever since the arrival of President Nixon and Secretary of State Kissinger to Beijing in 1972.
Now, as you bring up the Chinese government's attitude, it would appear that in recent years, behaviors toward American allies in Southeast Asia have begun to change. Is there any reason to worry that this is more hostile behavior that can lead to conflict with the United States?
Well, Bill, I see two possible reasons for this behavioral change. One is the fact that many in China believe that they no longer need to ride the coattails of America to be a successful nation. They now believe they can succeed without American aid. The other possibility is that society itself has begun to change. It is becoming more necessary that government figures take heed of their citizens' views, which, as I stated earlier, include ill will towards the United States.
Now, do you believe America's recent struggles with the recession and escalating national debt have or will have any impact on the relationship between the two powers?
I think that when the recession hit, many people both around the world and in China itself were surprised at the wherewithal China possessed to get through the global crisis. This has strengthened national pride and led to the belief in China that the West needs them more than they need the West. It appears that many are in favor of the government forsaking its ties with the United States and competing head-on with them.
Now, you bring up competition. It appears that China has begun possessing many of the world's natural resources, including oil. In fact, a recent report showed that China has become Saudi Arabia's biggest oil customer and that half of the oil it burns is imported, a number that will rise in the future. What do you feel that this grab for resources is taking place?
The U.S. is partly to blame for this, since China follows America's so-called operating system for the collection of natural resources through maritime trade. China has been bulking up its navy in order to protect this operating system. What this comes down to, Bill, is that China no longer has trust in the global trading system, for it feels that many countries, America included, do not want them to succeed as a rising power.
Now, what do you feel will be the leading factor in how China acts toward other nations in the coming years?
I believe the key to determining China's course of action lies in their economic growth. Should China continue to prosper economically, it will become more assertive. However, should they run into hard times, their strength among other nations will be diminished, which will force them to be more complacent. I personally believe that China will continue to flourish economically and will continue this assertive behavior. And the key then lies in how countries react to this change in China.
Okay, and with that, we will take a quick commercial break.
Japan's in a special case because they've just had an election. They have a new government. That new government has indicated in a variety of ways that it wants to look at aspects of the alliance. It says it wants a more equal partnership. Some in Japan are very worried that Japan is going to distance itself from the United States with some consequences. Others are afraid that if the new government goes off in a certain direction on things like the configuration of our bases, that it will lead to a breakdown.
Hello and welcome back to the program. With that, we will move on to the third and final topic of discussion, in the balance, which will look at the choice Asian countries have of who to ally with. For most Asian nations, China has become their chief trading partner, and as they continue to develop economically, this role will only increase. However, an increasingly powerful China also means security risk for these nations, who then turn to the United States for aid. However, an alliance with both China and the U.S. is becoming increasingly difficult to pull off, isn't it, Matt?
Yes, Bill. While Asian countries want it both ways, the decline in the relationship between China and the U.S. is making this nearly impossible. China has gone out of its way recently to show neighbors that it is both peaceful and trustworthy, most notably through the resolution of border disputes. Out of their last 23 border disputes, 17 have been determined in favor of the other nation. And then for nations to see this and still ally with the United States is making China increasingly frustrated.
Well, it appears that China has been very giving in this resolution of land border disputes, but that is not the case with maritime disputes, is it?
Not at all. Over the years, China has been very aggressive when it comes to sea claims. Some of the more notable quarrels over the years involve Vietnam, the Philippines, South Korea, and also Japan. In the recent naval skirmish between the Koreas, involving the sinking of a South Korean vessel, China sided with the North, which showed South Korea that they are not to be trusted upon as an ally.
Now, what can Asian countries do then to fend off the power of China yet keep their trade networks flourishing?
Well, Bill, it comes down to two things. One of these is that many countries have begun to build up their supply of weaponry and put more money toward the development of their armies and navies. Countries including Australia, South Korea, and Japan have begun this process in recent years. The second is that these countries have begun to turn to the United States for protection. In recent years, the U.S. has conducted military drills with Vietnam, Japan, and South Korea most recently.
Well, some of these countries see the need to rely on America for support. That is not necessarily the case for everyone in these nations, is it?
Most of these Asian countries seem split on whether to side with the United States or not. In South Korea, for example, a change in government in the recent years has really indicated a change in the perception of America. For the last president, he decided that America was not to be counted upon and drifted away from it. But the new president has decided to reconstruct these ties. And in Japan, certain factions are split on whether or not to support the United States or ally with China.
Well, it certainly appears that a competition is shaping up between China and the United States for the loyalty of other Asian countries, which could prove to further sour the China-America relationship in the future. Only predictions can be put forward on this future, and only time will tell what China's rise will bring to international relations. The topics that have been brought up in today's discussion are all potential crisis points for America and China in the future. Concerns over the Pacific, a more assertive China, and competition over Asian allegiances are all present in modern relations and will most definitely be on the table in the coming years. Now, I'd like to thank Matt for being here in today's discussion, and I am Bill Loudney. Here it is, your moment of Zen.
宝达狮子10年中最令人感动的游戏。哇！宝达狮子，快来转动圆盘，试试您的运气。您会成为最终剩下的人吗？宝达狮子，2006年全新版本，哇！充满了无数。